Well, friends, we've made it 100 episodes. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Corey.
And this week you're tuning in to the 100th episode of Turntables Tea. And we are celebrating that by kicking off our Monde Green month by talking about the Rolling Stones and their 1972 album, Exile on Main Street. A perfect band and album to do a 100th episode for, if you ask me. We determined that last week. So what a time. And the double album too. Their
Yeah,
white
man.
album, I guess you could say there was one double album of that era.
Yeah, their White Album is almost perfect. It's a wild time for them. It seems, not to get too far ahead, but it seems like this was the end of them really trying to do roots rock, and we get this wild party, almost party like album coming out of it.
Yes, it is. It was a party when they recorded it. It sounded like that was what do you expect from the Rolling Stones in the early 70s? Of course it was. So that was just what they were doing. But this all ties into Armando Green and Fish, because why is that? You tell us, please.
A little backstory. Every year or every Halloween, Fish used to do a dress up, but instead of dressing up, literally, they would do an album, an unannounced album. Sometimes they would have, like a countdown where you would have a bunch of albums knocked off each week. This year, it culminated in a festival out where they have Coachella. And there were a few albums left when we got there, and they ended up being the campgrounds. And one was Exile on Main Street, which we weren't staying at. We were staying at Electric Ladyland because that was still in the mix. But they ended up doing Exile on Main Street for Festival 8. It was my wife's first Fish show, really, actually. It ended up being a 3-day rundown in the old Polo Grounds, but it was amazing. It was amazing. Horn sections and the likes. Love and Cup was one of their staple covers, so there was already a beloved Fish feeling inside of it. But such a cool album to see played live by a different band, note for note.
Most definitely, but it's pretty funny to know Fish has done some of these songs more times live than the Rolling Stones have, especially Loving Cup, which I think the Stones have played less than 10 times ever.
Yeah, Love and Cup's my jam. I used to find it only in the encore section, and now it's made its way into the set list rotation. But nothing better than singing along with What a Beautiful Buzz at a good old show. Definitely one of my favorites.
It's one of many classics on an album widely considered to be an all-time great, though its reputation hasn't always been that. But before we get there, we have to travel back in time to 1971, when the Rolling Stones were commercially on top of the world. They were widely considered the greatest rock and roll band in the world by this point in time. And who was going to fight that? But their manager for a while was this guy named Alan Klein. We talked a bit about him last year when we talked about the Beatles and their Let It Be album. But before that, he managed the Stones, and he really screwed them over. There's no other way to put it. He was controlling all of their finances. The band did not have the money to show for their success. And Alan Klein did not pay taxes on the band's earnings. So he made the Rolling Stones tax exiles in their home country of England because they were top earners. They were expected to pay up. And the band wasn't opposed to doing it, but their manager didn't. So they were definitely between a rock and a hard place. It was not good times. So they left England and went to France to basically be tax exiles. They were working to get the money to pay the tax that they owed by just getting back to work, because they were on a pretty strict album a year schedule at this point. 71 was the year Sticky Fingers was released. And they just knew they had to keep going. Mick Jagger even said in the Stones in Exile documentary, we didn't think of it as just we're going to make this album. We're thinking of it as we're recording material. We know it's going to get used because that was how the Rolling Stones were working and how many bands were working circa 1971, 1972. But Keith Richards got a really expensive villa and in Nelcott, France. It was about $10,000 a month, which today will get you a two-bedroom apartment in the United States. It feels that way,
I
that's
bet.
for sure. And yeah, it was a very free-flowing atmosphere, though. It was more lawless. There was more lawlessness in the south of France than there was in England. And they just did whatever they want. And these recordings took place very late at night. And it was a lot of improv. And their engineer, Andy Johns, even said they would play horribly for 2 or 3 days at a time. And then it would all come together, which is mind blowing. But yeah, it was recorded in this murky, poorly ventilated basement, was where much of this album was recorded. And with free flowing booze and drugs. And that was what they were doing. And they did that throughout most of the summer until about September of 71 when it was just time to go. The law was catching up with them. And they ended up finishing this album in the early months of 1972 in Los Angeles, where they were able to put finishing touches on it and even get some of the best musicians the United States had to offer to contribute to the remainder of this album. So this album was released in May of 1972, and people hated it. They,
Yeah.
yeah, they thought this is poorly produced. You can't understand what they're saying. It just was not well regarded.
There was a lawlessness. There is a lawlessness in the sound of this album. You can feel how it was being recorded. Even the staff on the album, even the engineers on the sound were as free flowing as the booze and drugs. It seems like where, people that started one recording didn't finish, and all around just a wild, wild, lawless sound.
Yeah. And it was also a double album, which automatically made it a bit less accessible to the record buying public because it was a bit more expensive than the previous single albums, but it still hit #1 in a ton of countries. And the band went on their first American tour in 3 years. And that tour was a legendary excess in and of itself. Truman Capote was assigned to write about it for Rolling Stone and couldn't even finish the assignment because it was just too wild. But it was enough of an event that Truman Capote was assigned to write about it. It was the event of the time. And the party continued on the tour. There was an unreleased documentary made of the tour. And the main reason it was not released was because the Stones said they would not be allowed back in the United States if this documentary were to be released to the general public. But they got an excellent concert film out of it instead, ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, which has live versions of several of the Exiles songs and really the Sticky Fingers songs too, because they were kind of supporting both albums in the US at this point, since their last tour was 1969. But as the years have gone on, this has often been considered the best Rolling Stones album of them all. And it doesn't have the band's biggest hits on it for the most part, but this murkiness and party vibe of it that was initially derided has gone on to be celebrated because it creates an atmosphere unlike other albums of the Stones, even if it might not be quite as compact at 18 songs as Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers at 9 or 10.
Yeah, I can see how it could be a little bit inaccessible, but I try to put myself in that mindset after listening to it so many times. I can't find the negativity. I can't find where the negativity comes from or was coming from, because even with this lawlessness, for me, it definitely has purpose, and it definitely has drive, and really it even has pacing, which we'll talk about, but it would definitely wasn't heralded at first, which is crazy.
No, not at all. It did take some time for the tide to turn in regards to this album, but now it's often the highest ranked Rolling Stones album on any greatest albums list. In the first two editions of the Rolling Stone magazine's 500 greatest albums, let's be clear, Rolling Stone magazine, this was at number 7, and in the more recent 2020 edition it only dropped to number 14, which that's much less of a drop than other high up albums got. So its reputation has remained steady into this decade as the high water benchmark of the Rolling Stones.
I think it is. I really do. I'm with that. I will herald it as a very, very high benchmark for them.
Yeah. I might have an unpopular opinion. I will spoil this is actually not my favorite Rolling Stones album.
Okay.
But this is a band with several classic albums, so it's kind of hard to go wrong with it. There's not too many controversial picks when it comes to your favorite Rolling Stones album. That's yeah, I'll reveal my favorite later on because that is a different time and place, and gotta focus on the lawlessness in the south of France for Exile on Main Street. So let's take it back to 1972 and get this baby started. But before we do that, also subscribe to us where you're listening to us. So you can turn back in time to multiple eras. This week it's 1972. Next week it'll be another time. But, just do that and follow us on social media. Links are below in the description. So the album begins with Rocks Off. This song came about really quickly, actually. Keith Richards nailed his riff for this song in 2 takes, and it seems like a pretty standard opener, but then midway through, you get some psychedelic effects on Mick Jagger's vocals, which kind of interesting. The Stones' trip into psychedelia did not go too well when they tried it in 1967, but it worked just fine for him here. Yeah, this is just it's rocks off. It's a great album opener that really no band could do better than the Stones at this point in time. I mean, I feel like they could do this in their sleep. And it's rocking. It sets the party mood of this album perfectly. And it's a great Stones song. I was really happy that this was on the set list when I saw them a few years ago, actually. It was a special request, but they did it. And that was definitely a highlight of the show to hear Rocks Off.
I can only imagine live. I'm glad you said in their sleep because it really, for me, it really reads like a cookie cutter Stones song right off the bat. But it's such a perfect opener here because it gets into this psychedelic kick in the middle. And just the way this song is produced, put together here is very, very out there and full. And it's something that you don't expect right off the bat here from them, and you don't expect with the way that this song comes in. So I've always enjoyed this one, but as far as an opener, this is really, really well done, and it sets exactly like you said, it sets the tone for this album within this one song. A great choice for an opener here.
Most definitely, and they're going to keep the party going with "Rip This Joint," which was a result of a jam session at this villa in France, because that's how they did it. And Bill Janovitz, who wrote the 33 and the Third book in that series on Exile and Main Street, described this song as, quote, a modern day Route 66 travelogue from Birmingham to San Diego, unquote. And that just sums it up perfectly. I think this song is frenetic in the best way possible, is what I would say. It's very fast paced, but they really are ripping the joint with this song. And I just love to hear it. It again just keeps this party going. And I feel like I'm like at a concert almost hearing this, and that's what I want from a Stones album, and that's what I'm getting.
Yeah, there's this live aspect of it that almost reminds me of like a basement party. And even inside of this rockabilly feel that they get and this fast paced, I love the word frenetic that you use. That it's a great word for this song. Even inside that, for me, they get this little bit of punk feeling almost, or there's like this anger, this basement mix anger that I can feel coming through while they rip this joint. It to put it, mildly, it keeps the party going. But this one definitely does. It rips that joint all the way through, and it gets you moving on the number two spot. I said earlier, the lawlessness of the sound here is wild, but there is purpose, and this being number two is just really well, just all perfectly put for the pacing of this album so far.
Yes, and just because I felt like mentioning a pop culture thing that I have in my head, the seventh season of that 70s show named all of its episodes after Rolling Stones songs. And one of the
Okay.
better episodes of that season was called Rip This Joint. It's overall a pretty mediocre season of that series. But I think I'm glad to know that one of the best songs off of Exile on Main Street was the name of a good episode that season. Because there weren't too many, sadly. So,
There you go. There you go. A double entendre in the name that sticks with that 70s show theme.
oh
I
yeah,
think
that it does.
it fits perfectly there.
That it does. But we're going to go back even a bit farther than the 70s with this next song, which dates back to 1966. Shake Your Hips. This is a cover of a 1966 tune by Slim Harpo of Louisiana. It was Mick Jagger's idea to cover the song, not surprising, because he just loved that suburban music scene that really spoke to him. It still does, I'm sure. And I mean, the Stones are masters at covering the blues. That's always been their forte. It was before this, it has been since then. And this is another example of that. It's just part of that. It again just adds to that atmosphere. I love that they showcase something not quite as well known to the general public and put it on their album. And it holds up alongside their original compositions here, which doesn't always happen when you're covering something completely out of pocket, it might seem. But in this case, it's not. The Stones covers, in this case, they weren't. Some Stones covers were a bit more out of place on the albums after this time period, but at this point, they were really adding to their albums, and it was part of the complete vision. And this is an example of that.
Yeah, this is always one that blew my mind because it's so out of pocket. It's so out of character, in my opinion, for them, and it works so well. It's one of those tracks that if you're not looking at the album, you think for a second, wait a minute, this did this go to a different playlist? What's going on here? But it's perfectly put here and it showcases them so well that it's undeniable. It always, and this is hindsight because it came after, but it always has that ZZ Top feel. But now it's more so LaGrange always has that that shake your hips feel, and it's such a cool little mind mess around for me as far as which came first, the chicken or the egg here. And in this case, it's shake your hips. It's a good one. It's definitely a wild one for them, but it works out well here.
Yeah, and I will say it's a more natural fit than the Stones covering the Temptations, even though I like their Temptations covers too.
Heard that. Heard
That
that.
happened later in the decade a bit, but we're back to the original tunes with the next tune, which is Casino Boogie. The writer Steve Appleford, who wrote a little book called The Rolling Stones, the stories behind their biggest songs that I've had for a really long time. He noted that this song and the next one were likely inspired by the fact that the band was staying right by casinos in France. Keith Richards spent a lot of time playing roulette and craps. It was a good way to get into the day, which Well, if you're Keith Richards, you can do that because that's just how you do it. As for the song, I will say this song's just okay for me. It doesn't take me out of the album, but I do think it is the weakest on the first side of the album. Doesn't take away, but doesn't add a ton to it. Just not one I think about all that often or go out of my way to listen to. Just all right for me.
Yeah, with so many cool sounds and the horns here, the pianos is going at it. It's a fun jam. But really, for me, I'm with you. It ends up being just that, like just a fun filler jam. It feels like it wasn't necessarily a full thought, more so just a beautiful movement that they put together and said, let's put this on the record. So I'm with you as far as especially this first side of this record. It's definitely the weakest out of the bunch.
Yes, and admittedly, in this song's defense, you don't want to share a record side with the next song, which is the big hit off the album, none other than Tumbling Dice. This started off as Good Time Women during the Sticky Fingers sessions, but it evolved, and Mick Jagger came up with these lyrics after speaking to a housekeeper who enjoyed gambling and playing dice, and he didn't have a lot of experience with playing dice, but he got enough from this housekeeper to write these lyrics, and we've got this great gambling tune. Yeah, an all-time classic. And unlike some of the other songs, this one took a while to put together. Engineer Andy John said putting this song together was like pulling teeth. But the result was definitely worth it. This was the first single off of the album, and it made it to number 5 in the UK and number 7 in the US and reached the top 10 in 5 other countries. And well deserved. It's just a classic Stones rocker. And maybe you weren't quite getting that at this point in the album, something that might have sounded in place on Sticky Fingers or Let It Bleed, but this absolutely does. This is the true transcendent song that has a life outside of Exile on Main Street. I mean, it was definitely one of the highlights of the show I attended. It was one of only 2 songs, but Tumbling Dice gets played live more often than not, which it should. It's a classic hit that deserves its stature. It probably should have actually hit number 1 everywhere, but you can't always get what you want. So,
All the pun intended there. I I definitely am so surprised that this didn't reach number 1 because it's such a timeless Stones staple for me. It's definitely one of the only songs outside of, well, one of the few songs outside of the Rat Pack that ends up being featured in my gambling playlist on Spotify. It's just one of those classic tunes, and it surprised me that it didn't hit number 1. As far as that production goes, it had to be a painstaking process because this one is produced to a T. It almost, and this is me nitpicking, this is so clean, focused, and put together that it almost feels out of place on this album because it's so shined up and beautiful. Such a great way to end this first half of this record. And we talk about it all the time, but this is a pure flipper. There's no way this is the end track on this side and you're not ready to flip this album right over. It's just classic Stones at its finest.
yes. And while it didn't top the charts, via a cover version of another rock legend, it actually hit the top 40 again a few years later. And this is important to talk about because Mick Jagger did play a part in this cover happening. Linda Ronstadt, who was the most popular female rock singer of the late 70s, covered this song on her 1977 album Simple Dreams. And it came about because Mick Jagger went to one of her shows, went to go meet Linda backstage, and told her, "You sing too many ballads in your show. You need to do more rock and roll songs." And she gave it right back to him by saying he needed to do more ballads. But her band really liked playing this song at soundcheck. but none of them actually knew the words because they couldn't understand them. So to do the song, Linda had Mick write the lyrics out for her, and he
Yeah.
did it, and they recorded the song. And I will say that version does have a cleaner production, and she did a great job on the song, changed the lyrics a little bit, but it became a hit all over again. And when the Stones toured the US again in 1978 for the Some Girls album, which, spoiler alert, is my favorite Stones album. And in Tucson, Arizona, Linda Ronstadt joined the Stones to sing the song with them because that was her hometown. So hard to think of a better co-sign for a Stones cover than that. So it's a great story all around, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's such. I love to hear beautiful voices sing this. The Ron Stant is beautiful. When I got to see, it was a high point of the Fish Festival too, because Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings were with them.
Ooh.
So Sharon Jones in on this was just beautiful. Such a great place for beautiful, great song for beautiful voices.
Most definitely. R.I.P. Sharon Jones. What a
I
loss.
bet.
What a
I bet.
beautiful voice. But it's funny you mentioned gambling songs because this next song found its way into a pretty big gambling movie as we flip it over to side two, which begins with Sweet Virginia. It's a country tune about drugs. It originated during the Sticky Fingers sessions, and Graham Parsons, in an interview before his untimely death in 1973, said that he did backing vocals on this song. The band's guitarist at the time, Mick Taylor, said, "No, Parsons didn't sing on this song. I did." So who knows? Who knows? I'm inclined to believe Mick Taylor of the two, actually, but I digress. Uh, but yeah, this song did appear in the movie Casino, and it also appeared at the end of the film Knives Out. So a beloved album track, just based on those appearances alone. But it's deserved. I don't usually go for country style songs, but the Stones did it really well here, and they sang about what they knew, which is drugs. They did know that. And in country, you gotta sing about what you know if you're gonna do it right. And well, Stones did that. So it's definitely one of the best storytelling Stones songs, in my opinion. And when they went into that bag, they did it real well. And this is a shining example of that.
Yeah, it's always wild to listen to what Scorsese picks for his soundtracks, and it fits so well in Casino. Almost like when he picked Clapton for Goodfellas, but it just really well done stuff, and adds to any powerful narrative with, like you said, its own powerful narrative. This is a really, really well done story. And you're right, the inspiration comes from what you know. And hey, man, if there's anybody, they know what they're talking about. um as far as the country like shuffle of it's beautiful, but anything you got with Bobby Keys on top of it, let's go all day. So it really adds the element with that sax solo and a harmonica of all pairings. This is it's a great way to start, and it is it's such a neat song. I You guys don't get to see us, but there's every once in a while a song makes me smile ear to ear, and this one does. There's something about Sweet Virginia that I can not deny.
Yeah, it's an undeniable tune. And they're actually going to keep the country going a bit with the next track, which is Torn and Frayed, probably the most Graham Parsons influenced song on the album, it's been stated. And this one tells the story of a drug dependent guitar player whose name we learn is Joe, but it could be Keith Richards, actually, it's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
stated, because
I heard.
he was sinking in deep at this point in time. But yeah, this is just one of the softest and most self-aware songs here. A lot of introspection here that really just make this another great Stones ballad. I feel like this is kind of the dead flowers of this album. They're not quite as dark, but I think it's the closest we get to that kind of song here.
Yeah, I can see where you're at there. I I find a as sad as it might be, I always find a joy inside this one. Um, we're talking about, we're in the Mondegreen month, and we were talking about the fish festival, but this always has like it always feels like a Grateful Dead song to me. It just has that folkiness inside of it, and I've always loved it. I For me, a lot of it comes from the high harmonies and the vocals, the almost screeching high harmony, as far as the way it comes across here. But this song just stays, man. I find myself singing this song more than a lot of tracks on this album, and it's always spoken to me in that sense. I dig this song, and it's in my number 7 spot, so I got to dig it a little bit more. But this is definitely classic. This one, I was looking at the numbers for this, and as far as streaming, it's the unsung hero. Apparently it's way under any of the other streams, and I'm a little sad about that, because I think this is, for me, this is one of the high points of the album. I love this song.
This album's kind of understreamed, period. Actually, I was pretty shocked to find out the Rolling Stones only have one song that has topped 1 billion streams on Spotify.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep. And it's Paint It Black. So well before this one,
That makes
which
sense, I guess, but still doesn't make sense as far as their place in the history of music.
no, it doesn't. It does. It's not the first one I think a lot of people would have predicted to be at, but classic song either way, as are all of these songs. And good time to mention Paint It Black, I guess, because we are going to talk about something a bit dark on the next track, which is Sweet Black Angel. This song was inspired by activist Angela Davis, and Mick Jagger is calling for her freedom on this song after she was accused of aiding a courtroom takeover in Marin County, California in 1970. She was acquitted of these charges shortly after Exile was released. But this is a rarity in the Stones catalog in terms of being an overtly political song. Um, it's There were songs before that had quite a bit of subtext in them, most notably Gimme Shelter, but this one's very explicit in it. And Steve Appleford wrote in his book that, quote, Jagger penned an example of extreme black caricature to rival Uncle Tom's Cabin, unquote. So this song does actually contain the N word, which don't say that. That part of it definitely has not aged well. I will say that there was probably a better way to make the point in no, there was definitely a better way to make the point in hindsight. I shouldn't be saying probably. There definitely was. We're not part of the community negatively affected by that word, but you still shouldn't say it. That's the main point. I do appreciate that the Stones made a social commentary, even if it's a bit tone deaf today. I do feel that's why a song like Gimme Shelter holds up so well, because it's just the subtext. That was what they were
Yeah.
better at. But I wonder what Angela Davis thinks about this song. I really do.
Yeah, it's wild because, like you said, we don't see it that much. And it is not, even inside of the lyrics, inside of the way he uses like almost like country grammar-esque type lyrics here in his poetry, he's not really hiding. It's right in front of your face. It's a very blatant narrative in here, and it's very almost off-putting. But I like the power in that, and I think he struck gold there. You can't deny knowing his intentions and feeling after you listen to this song, and I've always given it respect for that. um Speaking of hiding, though, it almost hides behind the way this harmonica and like slow country blues picking moves forward melodically. It really doesn't portray that. And I like that stark contrast, especially with this level of power in the lyrics. It's a really neat song. This is a grower period, and it gets better when you start to understand the song. For me, this is an onion of a tune here, and there's layers to be peeled back. I enjoy this one.
Yeah, definitely a lot going on in this song. But these previous songs have been a little dark. And we're going
Or
to end the side with a more positive tune, which is Loving Cup, the aforementioned song. This actually dates back to 1969 and the Let It Bleed sessions. So, yeah, easily the most positive song here, even if it's about getting drunk. But, well, Stones knew how to do that too. They sang about what they knew on this album, for sure. But yeah, this is the first song where we hear a bit of gospel influence, which we're going to hear a lot more in the second half of the album. And just definitely some of the strongest lyrics and vocals here. It's pretty easy to understand what Mick is singing on this song as opposed to some other tracks, especially ones coming up. But it's easy to see why this is a go-to cover choice for Fish because it's a strong song on its own. There is a lot to play with musically, and it's not the most obvious choice to cover at every show from this album, but they're going to do it because they got to make it their own. And this is the right song to do that with, I think.
yeah, just the piano alone. Fish outside of it. I'll take Fish outside of it for a sec, but just the way that this song comes in with that baby grand just speaking and really giving an intro without any lyrics, and the way that, for me, the way that there's this folk narrative of getting drunk off a cup of love, and it's all, it's really this boy or this person to person, almost like mating dance here, giving your what you're good at, what you're bad at, who you are, laying it all on the table and drinking a little bit of this loving cup. It's undeniably a beautiful, beautiful, happy song. I stopped talking about pacing for a second, but that was on purpose to get here. Coming off just this side of this record, of the first record, these four songs roll for me almost like a full narrative together, and I love it musically, just thematically. It really sits, and it culminates, with these darker tunes. They culminate in this beautiful happy loving cup, and then on top of that, like you said earlier, we really get this gospel undertone that we're going to see. So this is such a beautiful piece in so many levels, but more so because it is not necessarily just a record flipper. This is a flip to the next record and let's keep going. And it does that job 110%. So yeah, outside of it being one of my favorite Fish covers, this is maybe hot tea take, but this is the linchpin of this whole entire double album, where it's set, how it's made, and the way it takes what came before it and beautifully meshes it with what we're going to get on the second half of this double album.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree, but you do make a convincing point. You do make a.
Heard that?
We'll get to
That's
what
why we
I.
do it.
Yeah, we'll get to what I think is, but I do have to ask because this is your specialty. Do you have a favorite Fish performance of Loving Cup?
Oh man, the first time I heard it, and I'm gonna say the first time I heard it was in, I want to say, '99. It was Encore back then, and I was early in the scene, so like I was still in my butter Timberlands and long, like saggy jeans. I was a little yo boy, as they would call him, in this sea of happy hippies, and that was part of the draw for me. So when you get to an encore and what you're feeling, this community vibe, this happy, beautiful feeling, encapsulated into these lyrics of what a beautiful buzz. You will always find me arms wide open out on the lawn going nuts to this one. So yeah, the first time I ever heard it was definitely my fave. It just made sense.
Nothing beats the first time, I guess.
Yeah, man. I'm trying to think of a venue. It had to be East Coast summer. '99. I have to look it up. The first time I ever heard Love and Cup.
A life-changing experience.
Most definitely.
But I love that we talk so much about happiness because guess what the name of the song that begins the second half of the album is? Happy. That's it. That's the song. But this is a Keith Richards showcase. He's actually one of only two Stones on the song. We get some backing vocals from Mick, but other than that, it's this is a Keith joint here. We've got like your Bobby Keys and whatnot, those beautiful session players that help the Stones out. They're all here as well. And Richards wrote this and recorded a demo for this within 4 hours, which mind blowing. When you wanted to be productive, I guess he could. And I respect that amidst all the partying. Good for you, Keith. That's probably why he's still going today, you know?
Work work hard to play hard. Keith
Yeah,
Richards, baby.
that's his motto. But I mean, yeah, just another beautiful rocker. And Keith is not the vocalist of the band, but he does a more than adequate job on this song vocally. Mick's backing vocals definitely help elevate it. But it's just another classic Stones rocker and a high point for Keith Richards overall. When I did see the Stones, I have to be totally honest. Keith did sing a couple songs. I was a little disappointed this wasn't one of them. And a little
Oh,
surprised too, because this is by far his most popular composition too.
yeah, that stinks. This is a good one. I would imagine this is a good one to see live. I never made it out to see the Stones, but that has to be a good one live. The horns for me just make this whole entire song, or they finish this whole entire song, but there's no other way to say it other than happy. This song starts rocking. I could maybe just as a musician, but it's one of those ones where you get that bug up your butt, and you've got something. 4 hours ain't nothing to lay it down, you know. So I can see this one. It exudes that happy vibe that I can see it being easy to throw down for a musician. Such a cool jam here. This is one of those summertime for me. This is one of those summertime Stone staples that you can put on in the car, and it's nothing but happy trails wherever you're going. You know.
Most definitely. It even brought happy trails to shoppers at the grocery store when I worked there. This was
There
part
you
of the
go.
playlist. I was like, okay, this is a good song. I was never unhappy to hear it. And this was the second single for the album. It peaked at number 22 in the US. And it's very interesting with the British bands of this era. For the most part, they really were not big pop chart presences on the Hot 100. Zeppelin and Pink Floyd hardly ever released singles. The Who only made the top 10 once. The Stones were the exception amongst them. They hit the top of the charts 8 times overall, mostly in the 60s, but a few times in the 70s too. But it just goes to show that the pop charts didn't always tell the story of the overall impact that was being had because there wasn't a bigger band than the Stones in 1972. They were absolutely on top of the world, even if the Billboard charts might not have reflected it all the time.
Or I almost said, do you think it was the sex appeal? But I feel like Zeppelin had the sex appeal there, so that wouldn't be an actual argument there. Why they got so far up on the pops? Just the music, not the
Yeah,
sex appeal.
most definitely helped. And different record company tactics in the case
True,
of the Stones. They had a different management doing things closer to the Beatles than Zeppelin. That was really
true.
what it was. But the next song definitely would have never been a single because this is a Turd on the Run, pure blues here. Mick Jagger plays the harp on this one. I mean, it's a quick and fun blues joint. It's not a highlight of the album. It's not one I go back to a ton, but I, I don't know. I respect it for having a unique sound. There's nothing else that quite sounds like it on the album, and probably in the whole Stones catalog. It is singular in that regard. and it does add to the atmosphere of it, which there it is this collage of sounds at times, which is why I compare it to the White Album. It's just very eclectic all around in the way the Stones did eclecticism, not how the Beatles did it, but in the Stones manner. And so even if it's not a song that I go back to a ton, it has a place here. I'll give it that.
It does have a place. As a place musically, it fits in. It keeps the party going in a real party sense, in a real wild, chaotic sense. In my notes, I have, and I think this might be the first time I've written this. Short thought, weird little ditty. It's a weird song, man. It's a weird. The lyrics are weird. The compilation. I mean, the composition makes sense, but it shouldn't. It's just such a weird little tune. It's a quick one, 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Yeah, you got to respect it for what it is, but it's definitely not one that I turn to when I'm looking through this album. It comes on, I'm not mad it came on, but not one that I seek out. It does its job here though.
Yeah, but we're gonna keep the weirdness going a bit, actually. Next one's a little strange too. Ventilator Blues. This is actually the only song that lead guitarist at this time, Mick Taylor, co-wrote during his time with the Stones. So it's definitely notable in that regard. And this song was inspired by the lack of ventilation at the villa the band was staying at, which perfect. That's perfect. So there's no more atmospheric song on the album than this. So 100% there. So I appreciate that it takes us to where the band was playing. Nothing but respect for that, even though, yeah, individually there's much better songs on the album. This is a curio that adds atmosphere. That's what you gotta take it as. Not a great Stones song, but a character building one in this case.
I like that. I like it's a character building song. It is a character building song. It I didn't put two and two together on the ventilator blues being their sadness of poor ventilation, but even better way to let us in, like you said, show us exactly where you are. It plays well. Um hot tea take, gun to the head. If the gun was to the head, this has to be my least favorite on the album. For me, it does, it's there and it is a character building song, but I feel like it just goes, it doesn't necessarily have the purpose that everything has had so far, except letting us know where they were. So yeah, it has a good feel to it, but it's definitely my gun to the head for the album.
I I wouldn't say it's mine because I just appreciate the story behind it so much, but I can
Sure.
see where you're coming from. It's definitely not in the upper echelon of songs
No,
on Exile on Main Street. This is, I would call this side of the album the artistic side of Exile on Main Street.
totally
Uh,
agree with you.
the side free. And it's pretty it's and not many songs exemplify. I don't think any song exemplifies that better than the next one, which is "Just Want to See His Face," which Mick Jagger recalled was a jam between him, Keith Richards, and Charlie Watts, who we haven't really talked about much in this episode.
True.
Which it's kind of hard to with Charlie Watts because he was the quiet Stone, R.I.P. But you're in a band with such big personalities. He was content to be the quiet one, I think, when you're working with Nick Keith and even Bill Wyman, who crazy man himself. But realistically, Watts and Wyman are one of the all-time great rhythm sections of any rock band. They add so much to a song just like this. Bill Janovitz summed this song up brilliantly. I think he said this song, quote, sounds ancient and from another planet, a swampy, stormy gospel song that was recorded to intentionally sound as if it is a field recording document of a long ago church basement revival meeting, unquote. And yeah, that I can't, that's brilliant. That's it right there. Um, one of the most unique Stones songs ever. So many of the most unique Stones songs on this album, but I do appreciate it because of that. I'm not mad to hear it. I do feel like it works as an individual song more so than the previous two, even though we're in the artistic half of this, because there's just nothing like it. And the groove on it is undeniably strong. Like it's one that will stick with you all the time. And probably the best example of that rhythm section we hear on this album.
Most definitely. If this is the song to talk about Charlie Watts, this is definitely the song because he makes this song for me. Those timpani-esque, I guess it's tonal bass drums, and I should be sure saying this, but just that sound, that low tonal drum sound really brings the full package together here. And I'm with you as far as a percussion forward piece here. This is the one that really showcases the most. Also, it is the most basement, almost. Yeah, no, I'm going all the way. This is the most basement track on here, as far as production goes. But whether it was on purpose or not, it really does fit and add to the aspect of this song. It really gives I'm not going to use character again. It really gives body to this soul piece, this gospel piece here, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and we are going to end the side off with the most gospel song yet here. Let It Loose. This one actually does have a really interesting backstory on it. This was one of the later songs recorded for the album. They did this song in LA. And
Uh,
in the book by Steve Appleford that I mentioned earlier, he interviewed one of the singers on this song, Tammy Lynn, and she recalled that she got a phone call from Dr. John, one of the all time great musicians to come out of New Orleans.
there you go.
And she was a go-to singer for him. And he said, like, you absolutely need to come down to Sunset Sound right now. I don't know who this session is for, but I need you. And so she went and they got there, and it turned out it was the Rolling Stones. So it's like, okay, it's a good thing we're here. We're not going to turn that down. And several singers used on this song, one of whom had an impressive career on her own, Shirley Goodman, part of the duo Shirley and Lee, who uh, who were best known for their 50s hit Let the Good Times Roll, which is of interest to me because that was one of the first songs that Sonny and Cher ever recorded in their early days as a recording duo. Even before I Got You Babe, they did a cover of that tune. And this is the only song that these singers are credited on, though Tammy Lynn actually recalled being part of four different songs on the album. Dr. John did berate the Stones for not properly crediting musicians on these songs, and that is wrong. Everybody who participated on every song should have been credited. I mean, the percussion on one song was listed as amyl nitrate. Amyl nitrate, like, and it was a like that's ridiculous. Actually, that's really not cool.
No, I've been pulling back saying who's on what track because this one was, I'm glad you touched on it. This one was one of those tough albums when you're like, I know somebody else is singing on this track and they're not listed, and it's tough to figure out who's who. I'm glad at least on this one, everybody that was in this beautiful chorus of stars was given the proper documentation on it.
Yes, even if they should have gotten more of it.
Most
That's just a mess. And that might not even be entirely on the Stones. I wouldn't be surprised if record company politics had a part to play in that as well. But this is the longest song on the album. This one does clock in at over 5 minutes. And I have to say, this one is a grower. When you listen to it, the production's pretty cluttered. There's a lot going on in this song, but it builds and builds into that beautiful gospel overflow, and it takes you there by the end. So it that the ends justify the means in the case of this song. When it gets to its climax, there's just no beating it. even if this is a song that I think is exemplary of the production issues. I think if any song could have benefited from a cleaner production, it's probably this one, but it's still a really strong and beautiful song. And it does add to kind of that basement church meeting feel, I guess you could say.
It does, and it also adds to, in my opinion, it also adds to the party element because I mean, you got everybody on here. You already said a bunch. I mean, Joe Green, Shirley Goodman, Tammy Lynn, Dr. John, like everybody is here having a time and singing together and getting down on this one. This might be a hot tea take, but this for me could have been the album closer. Um, and it works well. It with a tiny bit of shine up, like you said, it could be touched a little bit more. But I'm glad it ends this side of this record, of the second record, rather than the album, because in hindsight, after listening and not getting too far ahead, but it aids to wrap up this package. So far, we've seen three different packages wrapped up, in my opinion. And I like how you said the art side of the album. I was thinking more of the experimental, but same type of deal where this ends this third of our experience here and ties it up really nice. It does. It's a beautiful, beautiful crescendo that ends with this awesome gospel performance. It was really well done.
Yeah, and I think that the structure of this album is so important to keep in mind because I think that gets a bit lost when you just hit play on Spotify or Apple Music. That was something I was
Right.
really struggling with a bit. And I
Right.
really did have to remember what the structure was as intended to properly judge the album because just one into another, it can be a bit of a rougher listen than it would be if you don't have that break to flip the record or even change the record. I think those
Agreed.
gaps are really important.
They definitely are.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, it's at a point when you, it kind of on streaming creates an effect where by the time you would have flipped it over, you're almost relieved to hear just a classic Stones rocker, which is what we get with All Down the Line. This was the first song completed for the album, actually. The Stones gave a demo of this to an LA radio station in late 71 because they wanted to show that they had something ready for the next album because we're in an era where the Stones typically would only have two singles per album, even if more could have easily been done. But that was just how it was done in the early 70s. We're not in the pop blockbuster era yet. That didn't really come about till a few years later. And this is that great full-on Stones rocker. And regardless of what how you're listening to the album, I am glad to hear it because we got some more experimental tracks. We got several in a row. So it's good to hear that kind of song that nobody does like the Stones. And this one is full speed ahead with that. And I appreciate that so, so much. So it's definitely very welcome at this point in the album and just what I want to hear from this band all the time. So a winner for me.
Yeah, it's a pure Stones bright shining moment and it fits perfectly. Again, we talk about these gaps, but this gap that we got to flip over and then boom, we had a little bit. Hey, it's wild. I'll use a fish metaphor here. I always love how inside of jams they can take it to where we almost forget where we are and then they punch us in the face with something and bring us right back. This is what All Down the Line does for me for this album. You flip it over, you had your experimental slash artsy style going for the last third, and then you get pure classic. I won't use cookie cutter here, but like just Stones. You get pure Stones. It's bright. It's high on the highs. It's full of energy and it's nonstop, like you said. Going forward, it really well done here. The hell of a way to open this fourth side, and undeniably a beautiful Stones song.
I have to ask, was this one of the longest jams of the album when Fish did it?
Um, I won't go on record saying it was the longest, but it was definitely going on. because, like I said, Jones and the Dap Kings, like with the horn section there and everybody getting down, they opened up so many times. But yeah, this one was a get down party style one.
I'm sure I was just thinking that has to be one of them. This is just
Yeah,
asking for that if you're
it was
going
it.
for it.
I have to see if I can. I know they're out there. I think I have them in my stash, but I'll throw you the soundboards for this festival. It was amazing, amazing. I'm so
Yeah.
glad, and I was a proponent for Electric Ladyland, um, but I was so glad when I saw. So they give you a playbill like you would be going into a Broadway musical, and here it is, boom, the cover of Exile on Main Street in the front, but with Fish's faces put into a couple of the photos. It's all right there together. Such a wild time. Such a wild time.
Oh, I'm sure. But after and the Stones are going to continue with the rootsiness of this side with the next track, which is a blues cover by one of their true heroes, Robert Johnson. This is "Stop Breaking Down," and the Stones totally reinterpreted this song musically. The original is a very fast song that's a little more than 2 minutes. The Stones almost double the length of it with their version. And we get lots of slide guitar action from Mick Taylor on this one, lots of harmonica from Jagger. And it's one of only 3 songs on this album that Ian Stewart played piano on. He was the unofficial sixth Stone and was their road manager for years. And would play piano on many of their songs, even though he was uncredited and not paid. But he was very loyal to them for a long time. Got to give him credit for that. And this is, I feel like this is a great example of like a jam band kind of thing. Like they extended this song and just found a ton to play with. And I really respect that. And this is another song, again, it sounds appropriate amongst all of these other songs. And while the shorter blues song, Shake Your Hips, worked better for the first side of the album, by this point, we're really elongating it and taking more chances. So this is perfect for this point of the album as we're crawling to the end of it. So I've got nothing but respect for this song. I think it works really well as a Stones song.
It does, and I'm so glad you touched on where it was on the album because I feel like if those two songs were in flipped spots, if this was early in the album, I don't think it would have worked well. And I say that because we're getting into the end, but we're also in this epic side. So it's a side where we can play with and elongate songs and make them work out well. And it fits so perfectly here. Where up top, I feel like it would have almost brought the tone down. Here, it really adds to the album. It's such a wild thing to see us this fast of a song slowed down, and I guess for me, just them being able to keep my attention and musically, and they do here, and it speaks to their genius of how they could find so much in this 2 minute tune and really flesh it out and make it their own. I love this song.
Great blues cover. But the Stones are going through their influences on this side. They're going to take it back to gospel again. And not more effectively than on this next track, our penultimate tune, which is Shine a Light. This song actually dates back to 1968 when Brian Jones was still in the band, and Mick Jagger wrote it about him and his drug problems. Unfortunately, Jones passed away in 1969, tragically at the age of 27 after drowning. So this song has a layer of poignancy because of that unfortunate fact. And it's a super gospel influenced song. It's got Billy Preston on the organ, and that automatically brings it up to another level if you're bringing in Mr. Preston. And this is just a perfect combo of gospel and blues rock. This is absolutely one of the most beloved Stones non-singles, and there is a very good reason for that. I can't think of a more moving Stones song than this one. This one really does take you there. I don't know how anybody couldn't be moved by this song. And it's beloved enough that Martin Scorsese, who we talked about earlier a bit, named his documentary on the Stones after this song.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. This is that jam. You want to talk about remembering one of the moments that blew me away? I mean, this one at Festival 8 was a shining moment in that set list, but because it comes from such a beautiful song. Um, this is the hot tea take, and I wasn't even sure if I was going to share it, but I have a love-hate relationship with Jager's vocals sometimes. There have been spots in my life where I don't feel him. And this is one of those songs where, as a singer, he really blows my mind. It's one that I've always enjoyed. And it was wild to see Trey sing this alone. You have Sharon Jones backup and all, but it was another one where Trey, especially back in 2010, wasn't necessarily, believe it or not, the vocalist that he is now. He's really concentrated on that. But it was neat to see him pull off a song that, for me, inspired such happiness as far as loving a good vocalist. So this one has a soft spot in my heart. I could talk about this one for hours. Shine a Light is a true gem in the history of music. I'll say that again. There's a lot of them being in the history of music, but Shine a Light is there, man.
Oh, easily, easily. Not even close. And if they were to put out another single from this album, I feel like it should have been this one.
I thought this was a single on this album. I thought there were three, but unfortunately not.
Nope. Nope. Not how it went. But you'd think, how can you follow that? Well, they did it with Soul Survivor.
Yeah,
I
man.
mean, it's a pretty simple rocker. It doesn't really have a crazy backstory to it. I don't know. This one, it's just not a very memorable song on its own for me. And it does work as a come down after the power of Shine a Light. But this is definitely my gun to the head least favorite song on the album. I don't think this song adds anything new to the album. We have heard these sounds before at this point. We've heard them done better. And it's just kind of a weak album closer. And I expect better from the Stones. I mean, Let It Bleed closed with You Can't Always Get What You Want. And this is just a weak closing track. I'm not a favorite of mine. If there is a complete song I could do without, it's this one.
Yeah, it's wild because I've been searching my feelings on this, where it does have a classic Stone sound, or where it has that Stone sound. For me, is the only silver lining that I can find for it being the closer to this album. Almost in like a jump board to the next album for them, just reminding you of who they are at their basic core. That's really the only reason I can figure why you don't have this in front of Shine a Light and let Shine a Light take us out of this album. I think Shine a Light would have been a perfect ender for this album, and you put just Soul Survivor above it. It's tough. It's tough. I won't say it's my gun to the head. I enjoy the song, but as far as a closer, it's like the one misstep on this album for me as far as pacing goes, and as far as the way it's structured. And it's sad to say it right at the end, but unfortunately, I think this one needed to be in a different spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. If they were going to include it here, it should have been in a completely different spot. But I guess it can't all be perfect, even when it's a Stones album we're talking about.
I
So,
heard that.
so yeah, there we have it. Exile on Main Street. What a ride of an album. One I hadn't listened to in a while, and it took some time getting back into it. It's a bit of an acquired taste, Exile on Main Street, but once you acquire it, it's hard to go back. I will definitely say that. A lot of fun to dive into the Stones. Really glad we did this for our 100th episode. So exciting. Corey, what is your final grade for this album?
Oh man, Exile on Main Street, Rolling Stones. Such a beautiful, beautiful double album by any band. But here we get a double album that is just the height of the Stones for me. We talked about the way these four album sides really had their own vibe. And I think that really leads to the strength of this album. We get to, even in this raucous, lawless recording space, we get to really go through some awesome, awesome modes of the Rolling Stones, stuff that we hadn't seen before and stuff that we knew we loved. And it comes together in a very, very close to perfect package for me here. I'm going an A.
I wasn't sure. I was getting into this. I was worried I was going to be against Gravy. Like this album's a bit overrated. I'm not quite seeing how it's their best. And I do stick by that to an extent. I did say earlier this isn't my favorite Stones album. And it does realistically have some filler tracks that don't stand that well on their own. But as a complete package, I do have to give it an A. Again, this is an acquired taste, but it is about character and atmosphere building. And it's a true story that we're listening to, if you really think about it, with this album, even if it might not be their strongest collection of songs. But in terms of the album as an art form, I think this is a great example of it. So I can't really give it less than an A in terms of that. It is very much their white album by that metric. So yeah. If you have to pick one of 18 songs, what's your favorite?
Automatically Loving Cup.
Of course.
But if I take Loving Cup out of it, Torn and Frayed. Okay. I love that song. I really do. That's my dark horse pick.
I'm a Shine a Light boy all day.
And that.
True classic. Can't go wrong with that. Wow, Stones. We finally got to them.
100 episodes in, and we finally got to the Stones. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was. Super glad we did it. And thank you to everybody who's been supporting us this whole time over the 2 years we've been doing this. Couldn't do it without any of you. And we're going to keep spinning and spilling for another 100. So, because it's Bond the Green Month, Corey, can you please tell us the next Halloween costume album of fishes that we'll be doing?
The next one that we're going to end up doing is a shorter one, but nonetheless powerful. We're going to be exploring an album by the Talking Heads called Remain in Light.
All right. I'm excited to do that. We haven't done a new wave act in quite a while in this on this show. Not even since like our first month or two, actually. So I'm excited to dive back into that genre. It's a genre I'm really fond of. And this is a band with lots of tea, lots of interpersonal dynamics going on when you work with David Byrne. So
yeah, I'm definitely on the same page. I was thinking about it all week, just how excited I am to explore this and hopefully open some ears to the Talking Heads. I don't know if everybody they know songs, I think, but I don't know if people get a full experience into the Talking Heads. So hopefully we open a few new ears. This even though it's short, this is going to be a fun one.
Yes, and I am actually going to also for this going to listen to the Fish version as well. I'm going to do it.
I like that.
I'm going to do some comparing and contrasting, see what goes on there, because it is a shorter album, and I am curious to see how these songs were reinterpreted, particularly in the new wave sphere, which I always love diving into.
There are some Fish staples inside of this album that have stuck around, just like Loving Cup. So it'll be cool. It'll be cool to talk about that as well.
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, we'll be back at it real soon to Remain in Light, and we'll only do it once in a lifetime, so you don't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe, and we'll be right back at it with you soon.
Peace.